Hello and welcome to the 118th episode of Growing Up Geek, the weekly podcast for geek entertainment and nostalgia. My name is Brad, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother Rob.
Anita, hey, yeah.
There it is, little Future Heads intro.
Yep.
You were at my house recently, and we jammed on that together.
We did indeed. This past weekend, we rocked out on the Rock Band, and it's still fun.
I felt bad because you came home at like midnight from your festivities, and you were like, I'm so dead tired. I'm like, but here's the thing. I just bought 2 Future Head songs.
Well, then I am obligated to play.
Yeah, I was perhaps a little rude, but I was like, you can't leave without trying these. So yeah, we rocked Hounds of Love and Decent Days and Nights.
It was cool.
It's cool.
I mean,
really
it's always fun to do, and the interesting thing about that is that you and I actually used to play Decent Days and Nights song all the time, but on I had a real instrument.
Yeah.
You, on the other hand, rocked out on a keyboard drum, but that was still sometimes better than what other drummers can provide on the real thing.
Yeah, before there was a rock band. I think we've mentioned this, that we created our own rock band. But it was a special moment. It was kind of like reliving something via Rock Band and the Future Heads. Yes. But anyway, so shall we just jump right into the show?
Sure, let's jump into it.
All right, so people probably know that the iPad is out, and I've been very jealous of the comic book apps on there. And so inspired by that, this week I went and tried to find a way to read digital comics online without an iPad. Basically, the poor man's digital comics.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to talk about here up front, and because I sort of roped you into this scheme here. And I went and basically found a bunch of free digital comics resources online. And actually, I was surprised to see how many good free resources there are from major publishers. And so we're going to do kind of a roundup of what we found there. But
cool.
Let's start off with who the publishers are, where they can find these things.
Without wasting anyone's time or money, here they are.
Here they are. So first one is Image. Image gives away a bunch of free issues, although it doesn't seem very updated.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a lot of luck like navigating through like the whole catalog that they put up, because there was like an error every time
I got that too. Like it was glitchy. Some images were broken and stuff. However, this is one of the few that actually like has full issues to read.
Right.
You know, like cool stuff.
Yeah,
too.
It was good. They have just sort of an HTML. I'd say they have the most plain reader of all the different websites that try this. Sort of a plain HTML thing comes up. You can arrow through the pages. I did find it to be a little glitchy. I think their servers are a little jacked right now.
Yeah, and I don't know yet if their reader is iPad friendly or smartphone friendly.
Right.
This is the thing, is that I tried out a lot of these on my Palm Pre.
Right.
To see if like there's sort of a competition, or even like if you have an iPad but don't want to pay for the app.
Right.
Like to here's a way to check out free comic books on your phone or things like that. And this one is kind of middle of the ground. Everything seemed to work up to the point where the reader came on.
Right.
And I couldn't tell, just because this page was sort of glitchy to begin with, if it was the page or if my phone was actually incapable.
Yeah, I found that it worked on the Droid. I was able to get to the page because it is just HTML. And you have pinch and pull on the Pre, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, so I think the pinch and pull feature, if you have a smartphone that has that, actually makes some of these pages really nice, because you can do your own zooming and panning, around the pages.
Right.
And so that worked, but I'd consider that sort of ghetto just for the server issues and the fact that it's a little outdated. Next up, though, is Marvel. And I think Marvel does probably the most fantastic job of digital comics. They have a pay service that's really reasonably priced. It's just like $50 a year for like all-you-can-eat digital comics, and their stuff is very high-res, crisp stuff, and unfortunately it's in a Flash player. So you are going to need something to... I tried it on the phone. It didn't work. But, man, on my 24-inch monitor at work, which actually does a landscape view, you can turn the monitor sideways, these just looked glorious. Displayed full screen, full page, and you can arrow through. Now, they offer a lot of stuff for free as preview issues.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's normally like issue number 1 of a series, or just sort of a random issue in the middle. But if you're a paying member, you can get, the full Monty. I just read free stuff, but I found their collection, even of free stuff, to be much bigger than the rest.
Yeah, it was really cool. And the neat thing is, while you're arrowing through, it doesn't just take you from page to page. It'll literally take you from like quadrant to quadrant. So it's zoomed up, and you don't have to do a lot of manual work yourself. And another thing I did appreciate that this had that a lot of the other ones we looked at didn't have was actually fan reviews or like reviewed ratings. So I could see, all right, Captain Britain looks actually kind of highly reviewed. So I might check that out. Soldier X, X Factor, X Force, X-Man, Uncanny X-Man, Double X Man. Like, those all would have like 2 stars or 1 stars, and I knew I could avoid those,
Yeah. It's kind of cool. They have a whole infrastructure, kind of like Xbox Live.
Xbox.
I mean, not quite like that, but yeah, Xbox. No, but they have a whole infrastructure that lets you kind of see, similar titles if you like a certain thing, which is cool. Man, I was able to. There was so much to read there for free that I wasn't even able to get through it all. It looks great. Like I said, downside is you can't view it on your phone, but Marvel is certainly rocking that. DC does not even have a digital comic solution. So Marvel is definitely making a killing there. Let's talk about Wowio.
Yeah.
Wowio is basically sort of like a public domain service. You need an account, but it's free to sign up. And then once you get on there, you can read public domain books and comics and graphic novels. And I actually found this to be probably the best one on the mobile device, like on the phone.
Yeah, it worked kind of for me. It had a weird glitch where it would like display half of the page and then nothing at all. But once you can kind of get it working, I mean, it clearly is one of the prettier interfaces while still being basic HTML.
Yeah, and it has a mobile site, I guess, is what I'm getting at. There's a sort of mobile formatted buttons and things, which was kind of nice. And I always saw the full page displayed on my screen, and then I was able to next through pretty easily. So if you want to read a comic on your phone, I suggest going to Wowio. They don't have a lot of the mainstream titles, but they do have a lot of oddball titles like Ray Harryhausen Presents The Wrath of the Titans, which is like, whoa, when did this come out?
Yeah.
And then they have a few, I guess the most mainstream things they have are from Top Cow. For example, you can read Wanted, some of the series Wanted, and some of Witchblade and The Darkness and Pit, which I experimented a little bit with, and we'll get into that. We'll get into some of our sort of highlights of titles we read.
Right.
But yeah, Wowio, surprisingly decent.
Yeah, I mean, it's not all free.
Right.
Usually, though, it is just like 99 cents or so for the actual purchase stuff. Some of it is free. Mm-hmm. Like you said, there's public domain. And this was something also that set it aside for me from the other comic book readers, is that, you go on there and you're like, oh, Beowulf as well. Not a comic book,
right?
But the actual Beowulf novel.
The
Time Machine, like War of the Worlds. It's a cool place for people who not only like to read comic books, but like to just read in general.
Yeah, and because you have an account, you can store things in your library for later. And then even from the phone, I was able to access my whole library and just scroll through titles that I sort of saved, which I really like that feature. So that's kind of cool. That's Wowio. Another kind of oddball one is Newsarama. It's a comics news webpage, but I found that they have a feature on there called Spinner Rack, where different publishers from all over, Image and different places, will give them a free issue to display. This worked on the mobile site for me too.
It gave me the same sort of error that Image Comics gave me, where everything was displaying fine, but there was just a black void where the image was supposed to be.
Some of these are ad supported, and I wonder if it's the ad is glitching out, because there was like a Google ad or something on some of that Newsarama stuff.
Yeah.
However, even just the regular web experience, I think is pretty interesting. This site has, like I said, just maybe 20 or so issues, but they're like issue number 1 of series like Walking Dead, or they had the Dead Space comic. They had I Kill Giants. So a lot of cool stuff there, and worth checking out. I never heard of this site before.
Yeah, and I do like how it draws things from a bunch of different sources. So
yeah, I mean, ideally, if you have a one-stop solution, eventually, if I get some kind of a comic reading device, I would want to have a store with all the different publishers. I don't want to necessarily have to go to Marvel's webpage, or Marvel's app. I'd like to have it all in one.
And then the last one we checked out was Dark Horse.
Right.
Kind of the same, although lame that it was only like 3 or 4 page previews of the individual comics.
Yeah, huge library, but and they make things that are licensed a lot. So you have Star Wars and Mass Effect, that kind of stuff, but you only get like 2 or 3 pages. Still, I think that can be nice just to figure out what you might want to read,
and what you don't want to read.
Right, and that's the great part about doing this the way we did it. I think was I was able to test drive and then skip things. I definitely don't want this, and skip. So what did you think reading them in this format? Because some people have said, the iPad is fine and everything, but it's only 1024 by 768, and it's only 10 inches. When I was looking at these on my 24-inch screen, I was like, now this is really nice.
Yeah.
And at home, also on the laptop, I have a fairly large laptop screen, and I was like, that is nice. I really feel like this kind of art deserves a high-res screen.
Yeah, but 1024 by 768 is nothing to sneeze at. And again, you were talking about how just having the multi-touch really increased that experience for you.
It did, yeah.
I believe it. Like, I find myself looking at a lot of these pages on the computer and kind of just wanting that feeling of touching and moving and stuff like that, which is maybe what Steve Jobs was getting at with the iPad to begin with.
Sure. It's a level of control that you would have over a book, that you wouldn't have over a laptop.
Right. There's still something to be said about reading comic books for real,
Sure.
And you and I have been doing that for the most part for all the comics that we've reviewed on this show.
Yeah.
And there is something about the method to how reveals are handled in a comic book.
There is, yeah.
The turn of the page, things like that. You have sometimes the 2-page spreads.
Yeah.
And hopefully the reader is smart enough to not cut that off. So you're just looking at a guy's leg one moment and then his face the next.
I know, and I found that you mentioned the sort of guided smart panel view that Marvel has. Yeah. I really like that because I like focusing on each panel. You might call me crazy, but I actually have a sense of sort of like joy whenever I zoomed in on just one panel and just focused. Similar to, it's almost like Heavy Rain, if I could make a weird analogy, that it lets you decide when to advance, Yeah. You don't accidentally see the next thing. Like, there was a part in Surrogates where I just sort of stopped and just sort of dwelt on a panel. Cool. You could even get the situation where you get to a panel and you go, you know what, I'm going to walk away for a little bit before I go to the next panel. And I like that option.
Nice.
It's different, maybe, and maybe comics will have to be formatted differently to account for stuff like these, iPads and stuff, but I really like that one panel at a time thing.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I didn't get to read that many comics, but you got to read quite a few. If you could, just let's throw out our recommendations here. I'm going to start by listing off the 3 that I was able to actually read and get a feel for. The first one was on Image Comics website. I clicked on it just because it looked cool, and it turned out to actually be pretty cool. Yep. This is called Casanova.
Oh, okay, yeah.
People probably heard of this. I hadn't yet. And I stopped maybe halfway through because it started to get confusing and sort of wordy.
Right.
So that was like, all right, but hey, it's free.
Yeah.
But I did like the idea of like this sort of diabolique, James Bond bad guy feel.
Yeah.
But in the future, where things are sort of weird and unexplained. And like one of my favorite moments was there's a sort of staring contest in the middle of this issue.
Right.
Where it's actually like life or death staring contests, and there's this elaborate art that like explodes out of their heads like while they're doing this.
That's cool.
And so I thought it was a really neat thing. It was really interesting.
It's a black and white comic, right?
Yeah, it's black and white.
I tended to notice a lot of Image and the smaller publishers were black and white, whereas Marvel is just color just popping out of every place. Even if the stories aren't as good.
You can maybe feel Stan Lee's like pressing like, no, color sells.
Yeah, no, it actually it felt like the quality was raised because of all the color, and then you flip through and realize some of those black and white stories are more interesting,
Well,
but yeah.
Because definitely didn't help whenever I tried to read Mass Effect's comic at Dark Horse.
Okay.
This was a wholly different experience that I've never really intently read a licensed comic.
Sure.
But this was actually kind of funny. It was only 4 pages, but
Right.
the fact was, like, you could see the nerddom. Basically, I was looking at just the first panel, and it looked like each character in this was drawn separately. Just like somebody drawing like the coolest looking, Asari they could. And then they're all just mashed together. So it's all these guys sort of like staring off in weird directions and weird poses, like guns.
Like a clip art of Mass Effect characters.
It really, that's what it felt like. It was like clip art, And then like I almost felt a bell going off in my head each and every time some element from Mass Effect was mentioned in the dialogue.
Oh, right.
Like we have
like a drinking game.
Exactly. They're like, well, I know the Shadow Broker ding is not, is staticky, so something big's going down. And then like, oh yeah, like it was this whole kind of back and forth of just like geeky things. And
on that subject, a licensed comic that I read that was awful was Tekken. I can't remember which publisher I got this through, but Tekken literally starts with all these Tekken characters laying on the ground, and you just see the lyrics to "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor" playing. Like it's literally saying like "ting ting" for the drum part, and then "floor" like spelled out with a million O's. And I was like, I'm not going a step further with this.
Then it has like a little subheader or like a footnote that says "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor" by Drowning Pool, available on A&M Records.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Weird sort of like marketing.
So what was the last thing that you read there?
The last thing I actually was so bad I don't even remember what it was called.
Oh, shoot.
It was on Wowio.
Okay.
But it was just some sort of like demigod thing where I'm like, oh, this might be interesting sort of thing. And it was only showing half the page, and there was like a poorly drawn guy, and then on the next panel he was poorly drawn but in a different way, which was even worse.
There's a lot of garbage there.
Yeah.
And I think on a lot of these sites, which is one reason why something like this, like an all-you-can-eat service, although granted we're just reading free preview issues, but were there to be more of this, I think it's really helpful for the comic reader to just go, this isn't my flavor,
right,
and I'm going to close this. I'm not going to continue.
Yeah, I don't feel compelled to have to like some of these things.
Yeah, exactly. You didn't buy the issue, and then you're sitting at home trying to force yourself, to enjoy it.
Right.
I also really liked seeing the efforts of smaller writers and smaller artists. Because the thing about a comic book, it's a great way to give just a broke storyteller a way to tell a story that looks like it has a huge budget.
Yeah, explosions and stuff. Like you can't have you can't have a chase scene in a novel, but you can have one in a comic book.
Well, sure, and like an independent film can't pull off like a CG city, or like a 1,000 warrior battle or whatever. But an independent comic artist could certainly draw that. If you can draw it, it can exist.
Yeah.
On that note, a comic I thought was actually pretty brilliant. I hadn't read it before. People have probably seen the movie version of this, but Surrogates, #1 was available. I don't remember which vendor was giving this away. I think it was through Newsarama. But Surrogates was just brilliant in the way that it introduced you to this really sideways world. You probably know the premise from the Bruce Willis trailer, but I gotta say, nothing in this looks at all like that Bruce Willis movie. Like, he was all smooth-faced and stuff.
Yeah. For people who don't know, basically, surrogates, people transmit their consciousnesses basically into android versions of themselves, usually younger and more attractive. And so because they're piloting these things around, there's not much morality because they can't really die. They can get damaged. Yeah, and that's basically how the story starts, is two surrogates sort of making out in an alley and then being murdered, quote unquote, or just destroyed by an assassin, like an unknown person, and then the detectives come in to sort of solve the crime. Now, my assumption was that those detectives were humans, but then you see one of the detectives go home, and his body is sitting in a chair, and he just sort of turns off, and then the body gets out of the chair, and I was like, whoa, I didn't expect that the guys investigating the crime were also surrogates, And right. Usually it's the freaks who get killed, and then the good guys haven't succumbed to this kind of weird social. So it keeps feeding you information like that. I'm like, oh, I didn't expect that, or oh, geez, it would change the world like this. And this is only issue 1, but after a while of feeding me cool tidbits throughout the issue, you develop a sort of trust with the writer, where you're like, this is a good book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is good stuff. Unfortunately, there was kind of like a stereotypically religious villain, that was like quoting passages of the Bible while he's shouting, but
hitting people with it.
Yeah, I still thought it was pretty great book. I would really like to read more, and I don't think the Bruce Willis, the art style of that movie at all matches this. This is much more sketchy, very, very sketchy art, which is interesting that I'm saying this is the best book, because the art is actually fairly basic, really rough. And sometimes a person is only made up of a few lines, but you know what? You get it. Like, you get what's going on.
Right.
And isn't that interesting? The crappiest art engaged me the most, so story matters, folks,
Apparently, Mr. Art.
That is the the polar opposite of where I started as a kid, when I would only read comics for the art,
And trace them and get, like, all your skills from there. And now you do that.
Yeah.
Well, you draw for a living.
There you go. And another one highlight is I Killed Giants.
Yeah.
When I opened the book, I felt this sort of sigh of relief, because all the crap that I was wading through, and I read about a dozen different books on different sites, it was like when you hear Nolan North in Uncharted, that feeling you get of, whoa, that's refreshingly good,
Yeah.
That's sort of how I felt when I opened this comic, like, oh, there are still good comics. Okay, whew. Instead of the, crappy cliche, well, I don't know if Mass Effect was like this, but I assume, just cliche dialogue that you could write in your sleep.
Right.
I Kill Giants has this it sort of feels loosened from all that. Instead of being this wooden dialogue, it's really just terrific, quotable, almost like Napoleon Dynamite style dialogue.
Yeah.
Between all these D&D nerds and stuff, and there's this main character who's a girl that's an outcast being fed this motivational speech at school, and even the motivational speech is hilarious. It's it's overly positive teacher guy, and she's just wrapped up in her little fantasy world, and she proclaims to the class that she kills giants. And you think, all right. And throughout the course of it, it starts to seem like that may actually be true. There's just hints of it. But, it's black and white, once again. The art is very silly and cartoony. I really enjoyed it, though. It has those D&D moments with geeks, just eating Cheetos and arguing over stupid things. and then you see that there's a possible glimpse into an actual world here that she's connected with.
Ooh.
So I thought that was great. It's been recommended by a lot of people. So that was cool. A book called A Distant Soil also I thought was pretty cool. It's 80s sort of Robotech-esque artwork. I opened this, and it was on Image, and I was like, is this an old book or a new book? And it dealt with this sort of brother coming into an insane asylum to visit his like hyper-powerful sister. And it turns out he's actually a member of the insane asylum as well, or he's a patient there. And they break out together, and it was black and white, but it was done with the 80s hairstyles and 80s insults and things.
Nice.
And I went and researched it and found out, this is an 80s comic that's actually won a lot of awards and things. They've just reprinted it. So that was cool, very sci-fi. It really made me feel nostalgic while I was reading it. And then, I'll just say 3 titles. You tell me which one you want to hear about.
Okay.
These were all decent. Fantastic Four 571, 24-Hour Comic Curse, or Wanted.
Well, let's go with 24-Hour Comic Curse, because I feel like the other two people have probably found out about in one way or another.
Yeah, I'd recommend all of those, but 24-Hour Comic Curse was this thing a guy did as a project to just make a comic in one day. He had to write it and draw it, I guess. I don't know who, I can't remember, who the writer is, but it was ultra rushed. But because of that, it was actually pretty hilarious, because he had to be really just lazy with the dialogue and stuff. It's sort of like a Mallrats style thing where the guy gets broken up with. It's a nerdy guy, plays video games. And then he's roaming around, and a pirate jumps out of the bushes, just arg, and bites him. And he's like, what the? And then the guy runs away, And I'm thinking, where is this going? And I'm thinking that this guy is just making this up on the fly. And he's playing video games the next day and starts shouting on Xbox, I'm going to take you down. And he's tapping his foot. And suddenly the foot sound effect changes to a talk, like a hard sound effect. And he looks down and realizes his leg has become a peg leg. So he is turning into a pirate, much like a zombie bite, And he literally grows an eye patch that he can't remove. It was sloppy, but it was funny, and the art gets sort of progressively crappy. But
it sounds cool. Like it sounds self-aware about what it is trying. Like it only has 24 hours. It's gonna be crap anyway, so might as well have fun. It's like whenever I play on like Modern Warfare 2, I have the most fun if I'm actually resigning myself to the fact that I'm gonna be crap anyway and gonna lose.
Right. So the villain characters are like, we're totally going to make out in your car later, right? Oh, yeah, we are. Like, nobody's stopping the story for any character development, you know what I mean? Just keep booking through the events. There was something refreshing about it. I did enjoy that.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's cool,
Yep.
you know? In a way, it's also a commentary on, like, and there's crap that is like this that takes months to make.
And maybe there was a benefit to having to make it so fast, you know what I mean? It's like, of course, he had to rely on a lot of stereotypes, but he also twisted them. Anyway, yeah, so that's some of our free comics roundup and stuff that is available right now. I'd encourage people to go out and check some of these websites out.
Yeah. If taxes hit you too hard, if you got to save, money is on everybody's mind.
This is great for the jealous, person like myself who's like, I don't have an iPad, but I'd really like to read some more comics.
Obviously, comic books, the comic book reader on iPad was kind of a big story. Like, even outside of comic book venues, people were really talking about that stuff and enjoying how it was handled. There's risks involved with running a comic book shop and handling shelf space and stuff like that, that obviously a digital distributor doesn't have to deal with. And if the comic book sources can cut through having to distribute it through these kind of shady distributors and actually can get them directly to the customer through iPad or through computers, I think that can definitely boost it in a good way.
And most of these comics are made on a computer now. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. So it's not a difficult process to just transfer it over to a PDF or whatever format these readers can read. And I'm excited. I mean, as an artist, looking at each panel one by one and savoring the artwork on a big, huge screen, much larger than I would be able to do by holding the book, and sort of just taking in all the detail that's there. Sort of like when Mike Krahulik puts up his original panels of Penny Arcade, and you're like, oh man, we were looking at this shrunk down version,
Yeah.
That to me is very appealing, just to be able to savor it, and have none of that talent go to waste. So, anyway, that's digital comics.
Digital comics.
So moving on, we got an email this week, a really cool email.
Oh boy, mail.
Somebody named Adrian Snyder. Now, I don't know if this is a guy or a girl, so I apologize. They didn't indicate. But they said, hey guys, I'm enjoying the podcast a lot. Thanks for helping me get through the day.
You're welcome.
Yes, you're welcome. A while ago, maybe in your Street Fighter podcast, you mentioned devoting an episode to Tex Murphy, or more specifically, Under a Killing Moon. I've heard you mention it in passing a few times, and I can't help but perk up considering it's one of my all-time favorites, and also a game that nobody seems to know about. Most of my friends are really only into either everything within the last few years or Oregon Trail. I find that funny. Yeah, not much in between. So what I'm getting at is please make an episode about Tex. You have an audience for it. Take it easy. Looking forward to more, Adrian. Well, thank you, Adrian, and I am a huge Tex Murphy fan. Rob, I don't know how many of the games you actually played.
2. I played Under a Killing Moon and Pandora Directive.
I've probably been restraining myself from talking too much about Tex Murphy, but based on your email, I think it's time. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Tex Murphy, for those who don't know, was an adventure game series. It was actually a 5-game series that went from the late 80s through to the mid 90s, I'd say, from 89 to 98, actually. Yeah. And it began with Mean Streets and Martian Memorandum. That's 2 games that I never played. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to talk about those. But they were 2-dimensional games, very inspired by Blade Runner. What's interesting is that the actor who ended up playing Tex Murphy in the full-motion video later was the model for the artwork always. Like, even back when they did the 2D version.
It's kind of weird, but cool.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, they used his face. And that's a good idea because they eventually cast him. He's one of the creators of the game, Chris Jones. And so this is one of those small labors of love, where him and Aaron Connors just kind of like, they always had control over these. They loved old detective stories. And what they did is basically created like a gumshoe, like an old-fashioned gumshoe, although he was set in like the year 2034, something like that, 2042. And, in irradiated sort of post-World War III San Francisco. And that sounds kind of dark, but it wasn't. It was really funny. The attitude was kind of lighthearted because he's this boozy kind of human living amongst a world full of mutants,
Yeah.
and has this old-fashioned way about him, a lot of internal monologue while he goes about. And I can just remember being blown away by Under a Killing Moon. We got a demo of it with a book called VR Madness, if you remember that. Yeah.
Had a helmet like on the front cover, like this is the future.
Somebody's gonna get some VR. I think they showed a kid with a helmet on.
My brain stores 8 gigabytes.
Yeah,
had to dump a chunk of memory to fit it all.
Yeah, Johnny Mnemonic style. Exactly. Oh my God! But yeah, this is a total dating, of the late '80s, early '90s, the VR. And they had a bunch of crappy 3D. I mean, you know what? Nothing on this CD was even VR. But I guess they thought that the 3D sequences in Under a Killing Moon were qualified as VR. And they stood out above everything else that was on that CD. And when I saw the sort of like... there are portions of Under a Killing Moon where he navigates and explores clues via 3D. It sort of goes to a 3D screen, or you can do it in a window. During those parts, I was like, holy crap, this looks, on my 386, looked better than anything else. High-res textures. I mean, you were describing this, just watching like YouTube videos of it,
Right, I was watching YouTube videos today, actually, sort of brushing up, but man, like, those graphics still actually look pretty darn good. Right. I mean, they were scalable was one thing, so they ran on our 386, but whenever we finally upgraded to our super fast Pentium 100...
yeah, right.
Man, like, we were able to go full screen, and I think the thing really was that there were high resolution textures.
Right, yeah.
Your slants and everything. I remember we looked at a sink for like an hour because it was like the coolest looking sink, and we were like, ooh, curvy polygons.
Yeah, I mean, if you were used to Doom, which was sort of one of the leaders in 3D at the time, with those blocky walls and everything, moving to this, it was like, holy crap, vases and wallpaper and all kind of things in this sort of San Francisco environment. And something I didn't realize till I read the Wikipedia today about the backstory, which I guess I just sort of subconsciously took in, it's sort of always night in this world. And that's supposedly because of the radiation. Like, the government has switched to a night cycle instead of a day cycle to keep, I don't know, the heat down or whatever. So people are awake at night. But yeah, you were in this city. You lived in an apartment, or a hotel, excuse me. And you did all of your private eye work out of there, and you were basically broke, but you would roam around this little street. You had the whole street that had your apartment on it sort of for your roaming pleasure, and it was nighttime, and you saw piles of garbage and things. And anyway, that's sort of the look of Under a Killing Moon and of Tex Murphy. But the gameplay was pretty inventive, I thought, also, because every single thing that he clicked on, he commented on.
Yeah.
And I had done that in King's Quest and seen the text, but here it was audio, and pretty funny audio too,
Right. Yeah, King's Quest, I think 6 introduced a narrator who would be like, Alexander sees a thistlethorn bush. Like,
yes.
And it'd be cool, it would be descriptive, but it wasn't nearly as witty as this. And I'm just thinking, man, what a smart move to, even if it's subconscious, to use the sort of noir setting where it's already established that the detective will be narrating to himself.
Yeah, and it's something those classic detectives, she walked in the door, she never told me who she was, or, stuff like that, always those internal monologues. And it was pretty great, and you would purposely want to click on everything because you wanted to hear his quips about stuff, and I really enjoyed that. Even recently when I went back and played some more of that, I would go and click on everything because I want to hear those. And there's some of the really standout quotes that he had, and I've mentioned before about the robotic device that makes women obsolete, but he can't get it to work, and it just looks like this like mashed Geiger alien falling apart in the corner, and you're like, what is that?
They had and sometimes they would launch into like really elaborate things, like
FMV sequences too, yeah.
Yeah, his gun was sitting on his table, and he's like, my gun, I love it so much. And then it would launch into this FMV thing, and he's like, you want some of this? Blam, blam. And then he throws it out the window.
Yeah,
and like this kid picks it up, and he's like, hey, put that down, that's not a toy. And then like you see his like hat get blown off, and he sticks his head up, and he's like, oh my hell.
Yeah.
And then he goes back down.
Yeah, that whole thing launches just because you pick up the gun. It's funny, and I thought it was funny, and it was, it set up a character who was kind of a dope, but who was, ended up being a good private eye, Later in the series, they got a little bit more serious. If we move to Pandora Directive, which was the sequel, they started doing, Under a Killing Moon was about a cult that was trying to take over the world. It had serious elements. It even had James Earl Jones as the voice of God. Oh, looks like I'm sending in Murphy again.
Not Murphy.
Yeah. When you got to Pandora Directive, you had a lot more like sort of well-known actors, and you had this plot about a UFO cover-up and 7 different endings, and they got even more involved. Like, he was always flirting with Chelsea Banda, who is like the newspaper reporter.
Yeah. And
their relationship continued, through the games and things, but, you had more of an option of, betraying her or getting closer to her and walking this. Some of these things must sound familiar to you. Walking the good path, walking the evil path, and all of these dialogue choices. The thing that was so great was you could flirt with Chelsea, or you could be a jerk, or you could, and who wants to be a jerk to Chelsea,
Right.
But then, when it's Laszlo or whoever, your landlord, or Rook or some weird mutant, you can really lay into them. And it's funny because you don't really get kicked out or penalized that much for that stuff.
Right.
They might tell you to leave, and then you have to restart the sequence, but you're going to still be able to get back to where you were for the most part. Yeah.
What people are calling like this breakthrough system of sort of, conversations not based on directly what you're going to say, but the implication of what you're going to say, and then actually having it play out. That was a great decision back then because obviously it allowed for comedic surprise. You would choose sort of an idea or an emotion that you wanted to convey, and then he would act it out, but his dialogue would be still funny and hilarious and surprising because you hadn't just read it a moment ago.
I played the demo for Pandora Directive on a PC Gamer pack-in CD that came with like an issue of PC Gamer.
Yeah.
It was like, see the new Tex Murphy adventure. I'm like, oh, I got to get this. And it was back when PC Gamer had like this weird like interface that seemed like you were in like an alley. It was like, it must have cost them a lot of money to make like this, basically virtual world just to get to your demos.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember that, and I remember launching that Pandora Directive, and it had a trailer with music by Richie Havens, who's like this scratchy voice blues singer.
Really kind of like high class. Like I didn't even know at the time just how big a name Richie Havens was.
I still do not know how big, because all I know is Texas Lament,
Yeah, look into it. He's got some Beatles covers and things like that people are just in the blues circles especially known for. And it was a perfect pairing, for these
cool.
Tex Murphy things and set the serious tone, I think, that Pandora Directive was trying to convey.
Right, there was like a miniature trailer, and you can actually find this on YouTube, but even better than that, you can find like fan-made montages of some of the sadder parts of that game with this Richie Havens song, a really like kind of melancholy song about just sort of being a drunk detective, but it done in a serious way. Boy, that set my mood for that game. I was like, wow, I cannot wait. I rewatch that all the time, but that's about where I left it for a long time, and only recently did I go and eBay Overseer, because I thought, what, doggone it, I gotta beat the Tex Murphy series. It's sort of like Myst, where I'm now, trying to finish out the series with the only one I didn't play. And we'll have a Myst episode at some point, so if you're going to be the guy that emails us and says, where's the Myst episode, believe me, I want to do that too. But yeah, so Overseer, one of the first DVD games, period. And that was cool because all of these other, what we haven't mentioned is these other games had a lot of disc swapping.
Man, Wing Commander 4 just had like 7 or 8 discs, I remember, just constantly. And that, I remember when I was reading about DVDs, was one of the first examples of like, had this game been on DVD, it would have been on a single DVD-ROM. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
How is that possible? That's way too much.
It's crazy, and that's the thing. Like later when I bought Myst again as like the compilation, it had Riven on a single DVD. And I was like, oh man, because I was managing these, cardboard sleeves of, which island is on which CD, and oh god, to heck with that.
But that was, these FMV-driven games, they needed that stuff. And even today, Final Fantasy 13 is on 3 DVDs because of all the FMV, all the cinema.
Right, yeah. And there was something kind of nice, speaking of that cinema, about the way they handled the FMV in Under a Killing Moon. They only had the characters as video, and then the backgrounds a lot of times were these really nice sort of pre-rendered backdrops. There was a lot of blue screen work, in other words. And it really popped those characters off of the background in a way that I thought was kind of unique. And unfortunately, in Overseer, they had more of a budget. It was a Microsoft-published game. It was the first DVD game, and they're really pushing it. I think they even had a deal with Intel because they had a lot of Intel optimization in the game. However, the video sequences, they do real sets a lot of times, and I actually thought that sort of cheapened it because when you have to make a real set, it can't quite be as nice as the virtual ones that they built,
Right, and in a kind of the thing about that was like in Under a Killing Moon, the FMV sequences were actually the same art style as the gameplay. Like you might as well have considered it an in-game cinema.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Because when you're roaming around in the 3D world, it's still digitized actors who are the people that you interact with. So it's still that same visual look,
Yeah.
And I think one thing major that people complain about with pre-rendered cinemas or full motion video is that it does have a distinct, different look from the actual game that you're playing. So kudos to them to actually have a system in those first games that actually made it congruent.
Yeah. So unique. There have been a million FMV games. But this is one, and when you go to goodoldgames.com, who's actually selling the sort of new emulated versions of these for like $10, I mean, such a good deal. A lot of people in the comments are saying, "I never played this before, but I'm really enjoying it." So I think some of that stuff still holds up.
Yeah, there's some sort of timelessness to this game. I think that the graphics were just at where they needed to be to accomplish what they needed to. They weren't trying to overshoot. Like it's as good looking as it needs to be. And for this game about narrative and about all these sort of adventure, puzzle solving, cleverness, like things that have really fallen to the wayside these days.
Well, I know that's what I was going to say. Is this to me is like the height of adventure gaming, and I hate saying that because it's like 1998.
It's worth going back and seeing this game. And I think this, if you haven't yet understood why people are always talking about the heyday of adventure games, this may be one of those things to really try out because it's a different take on it. If the whole fantasy, like King's Quest thing hasn't done it for you, you don't really understand why that's cool, try this out because it has a sense of humor. It has all these other factors that make it interesting. Beyond
it planted
just that.
all these seeds of it planted all these seeds of cool elements for the genre, and then unfortunately the genre got killed in a sense. I mean, you can say single-handedly Telltale Games has brought back a lot of adventure gaming, Sam & Max and that kind of stuff, but I think Sam & Max is not where it should be if the genre had continued. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like if the genre had kept advancing in the way that first-person shooters have and third-person shooters have, and instead, it sort of got stunted. And Sam & Max to me feels no more advanced than Under a Killing Moon, maybe even less advanced. And I think that's a little bit sad. Like, shouldn't there have been progress all along throughout the early 2000s and things, of high-budget adventure games just continually treading new water?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like that has happened, and it's kind of a shame. But that's why I say
I gotta say though, I really feel like probably Heavy Rain, if it is
true,
what I believe it is, because Indigo Prophecy to me was a big reinvention of the adventure game genre. So
yeah, you got to play some Heavy Rain, right? I played the demo.
I actually haven't played any of it. I've watched the quick looks and stuff, but I had faith in them from the beginning with Indigo Prophecy. And if this is, in fact, everything everybody's saying it is, like, this is the type of thing that I think now not only is showing that adventure games can be done, but really making large studios really want to do adventure games. I don't know if you saw the recent Alan Wake sort of push on 360 or on Giant Bomb. I saw it. It was bizarre because it seemed like they were taking this game that they were building under one convention of we want action, we want these zombies with flashlights and you shoot them, like everything that was selling at that time. Then Heavy Rain happens, and Microsoft's like, oh crap, we need to present this as a narrative thing. So now
Right.
the trailer has this narrator just going, Alan Wake is the most incredible narrative thing with emotion,
nice.
emotion, and you will feel and dialogue and emotion and characters that you
Which
care
is all
for.
I cared about from the get-go anyway.
Right.
For that
I
game.
hope so, but
Yeah.
I hope that it's not like false advertising or cheapening like
Uses the James Cameron camera.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
If you saw the the new Resident Evil trailer, it's like, oh my lord.
Using the water effects from Titanic.
Oh god, yeah, something to
Thanks, EverQuest 2.
Yeah. We have to wrap this up, but I think you're right. Heavy Rain is trying to advance that genre. Single-handedly, maybe.
Well, I've also seen good things. I really want to check out Silent Hill, the reinvented version on the Wii.
Yeah.
And hopefully the iPad is going to be a good way to get
we keep
adventure
praying.
games finally going, like, because it's point and click.
Yeah.
And now let's just have point.
Yeah.
And it goes.
The sad ending of the whole Tex Murphy thing is that Overseer ends on a cliffhanger. I've mentioned this before, but just real quickly to wrap up. Overseer ends with Tex and Chelsea finally getting a chance to kiss and then getting into a cab and then getting shot. And right before they do, Tex sees a billboard of like a Fabergé egg and has like a momentary like deja vu moment where he's like, what the? And it's never explained. However, they did do an audio the radio theater, which was kind of clever and
cool.
It wrapped up a lot of the things that fans had questions about, but it hinted at so much more that was going to happen with Tex. It's really a darn shame. The company that made that, though, has gone on to make 3 Cards to Midnight and 3 Cards to Dead Time, which I bought 3 Cards to Midnight to support this company because they have a thing on their website that says Project Fedora, and I can tell that they would love to bring Tex back in whatever form he would appear. But yeah, adventure gaming. That is, for my money, one of the best ones. And so hopefully you've enjoyed this little walk down memory lane.
Yeah. Go check out an adventure game. Support your local adventure gamer.
Yes. And that's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you for listening. Once again, if you have an email of something you want us to discuss or that you feel we haven't discussed, you can send that to mail@growing-up-geek.com. You can also follow us throughout the week for all kind of geeky updates on Twitter at twitter.com/GUGBrad or GUGRob. And that's going to do it. Once again, my name is Brad.
Praise heaven, you brought the ambrosia of life.
And we'll see you next week.